Hey photographers, if you're like me, you're always looking to improve your nature photography, and we're always looking for tips, tricks, techniques, any kind of information that will help us capture those what I like to call visually compelling images. We're always looking to take our photography to another level. And I'm going to share with you today 3 tips that I think are going to help you see some instant improvement in your images. So I think as you watch through this video, you're going to discover some things that maybe you've thought about, maybe you haven't thought enough about, or maybe you've just never even tried. Hey nature photographers, I'm Lee Hoy, OM System Ambassador, photography workshop instructor for Wildside Nature Tours and Precision Camera and Video, and contributing author for the Journal of Wildlife Photography. Here we go. All right, so let's hop into today's 3 tips that are going to improve your wildlife photography instantly. All right, the first one I want to share with you is about shooting light. Now, we all hear about photography and light and how important it is, and indeed that is true. But a lot of times we fall into the habit of always shooting with frontal light. And while fronting light can lead to some beautiful images, and that is where the sun or the light source is behind us, falling directly on our subject, yeah, you can get some nice warm images, some really pretty images. Sometimes though it's a little two-dimensional, and what we need is some side lighting or backlighting or highlighting or reflected light, other elements of light that can bring more drama, more instant ooh factor to our images. A lot of times if you look through images on Instagram or Facebook and you find images that make you pause, you know, we're bombarded with, frankly, some really excellent wildlife photography every time we turn around. Well, how do we capture those images that I like to call visually compelling? A good image is not the same as a great image, and there are thousands and thousands of good images, but what makes a great image? What makes a visually compelling image? Well, one of the elements is going to be dramatic lighting. So while exposure is easy when we're using front light, in fact, that's about the only time your camera is smart. If you're trying to use auto ISO, which is of the devil, get rid of that crap, and I'll do videos on that. If you're trying to use aperture priority or any kind of exposure mode where the camera is in control of some element of exposure, front lighting, your camera is going to be pretty smart. Most other lighting conditions, side lighting, backlighting, reflected light, dapple light, the camera is going to be fooled by different elements in that. So while it may be easier to nail your exposure, and you can get some really fine images and oftentimes capture visually compelling images, you'll often find that images that truly capture your eye are utilizing some other light orientation. And you know, there's 3 different elements of light, and we'll talk about this on another occasion. Light quality, right? Light quantity, and direction. And here I'm specifically talking a little bit more about the direction of light. Sure, the other elements come into play, but I really think it would behoove you as a photographer to say, what are some of those dramatic lighting effects that can make my images stand out? For example, this image of a crested caracara in Brazil, as soon as I saw it fly out over the river, I knew what beautiful image I could capture. Ironically enough, none of my clients on that workshop, nor the other leader, even lifted their camera because I thought, well, it's a caracara. We see those in America. Yes, but this backlit image with even the insects flying above the river backlit, I believe gave it a much more dramatic tone than many of the images of crested caracaras that I see, say, for instance, taking it blinds in South Texas where the lighting is always from the same direction. And again, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but learn to look for light direction that can add more oomph to your repertoire, and it's going to force you to also learn exposure and how to control your exposure settings more specifically, and to put it in your hands instead of your camera hands, because you may not believe it, but you're way smarter than your camera. You will understand exposure way better than your camera once you put a little effort and energy into that. So that's my first tip. Learn how to pay attention to light direction and orient yourself for light other than front lighting, okay? So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, okay, that I want to share with you today, we are going to talk about the importance of knowing your subject so that you can begin to anticipate an image rather than trying to react to a subject's behavior or actions, which often leaves us just a little bit behind the 8 ball and not able to move fast enough to capture the image. As you get to know your subject, whether it be a bird, an insect, a reptile, an amphibian, mammal, whatever it is in wildlife photography, the more you understand your subject, the better you'll be able to anticipate what it's going to do and prepare yourself to capture visually compelling images. For example, a simple one, and many people know this, when a raptor is about to take off, it often defecates. So if you see a raptor, bend over, let it fly out the backside, then you should have your camera up, focus acquired, and be ready to capture a takeoff image of a raptor. Now that's a fairly common knowledge in bird photographers, but here's another maybe lesser known one. If you're doing macro photography and you would like to reposition or reorient, say, a beetle for a better image, if you touch that beetle or grab that beetle, many beetle species will play dead. They're going to go upright, they're going to be in that position sometimes 10, 15 minutes or longer, and you're not going to be able to capture a very visually compelling image with a beetle on its back with all legs up in the air, right? So it could be that you could just place your hand near a subject and you could orient that subject a little bit more just as it reacts to the shadow cast by your hand. All right. You can also learn to anticipate when certain mammals are going to undertake specific behaviors or knowing flight styles for specific birds. As you do that, as you develop that database of knowledge, you'll be capturing better images. So when we see an animal or a subject that we're not familiar with, it makes it harder to predict how it might fly, where it might fly, if it's a mammal, what it might do next. Is it going to be sleeping for a long time? For example, in Yellowstone National Park in winter, one time there were dozens and dozens of photographers waiting for these wolves who were way, way up a mountain. Well, they had already fed that morning on an elk kill, and they eat a ton of meat in a sitting, and they're going to be laying down for a very long time while they digest that food. They're not going to be active for a very long time. So there was really no need, particularly, these wolves are so far away, you could stand there for hours and hours and not have any activity. So knowing animal behavior will help you anticipate a great shot or even know where you should look for a shot. So again, as you can develop this database, and some great ways to do that, watching documentaries, but even better, there's plenty of books on mammal, bird, insect, reptile, and amphibian behavior. I love photographing venomous snakes, in fact, non-venomous snakes. I love it all. And a lot of people, there are many species of rattlesnake here in the U.S., like a prairie rattlesnake, that live in very open areas. And if you just keep trying to move towards it, it's going to S up, and it's going to back up. It's going to back up because snakes feel more comfortable. They feel more secure when there is something against their back. Okay, so if a snake doesn't have anything against which it can feel secure, it is going to probably move until it finds that. So if you want to photograph a snake, and obviously if you're photographing venomous snakes, I'm assuming that you are using tongs and you're taking safety protocol, or you're not trying to manipulate the snake at all, which is probably the safer way to do it, unless you have a lot of experience, then wait for that snake to get up against something where it feels more secure. And then you might be able to capture some better images. So knowing different things about helping subjects feel safe. If you're trying to photograph birds in flight and you see an area where there's a bunch of terns and gulls on a beach, and a lot of times when you have a flock, other birds will fly and enjoy them. So it makes for a great spot to capture bird in flight images. And you want to get as close sometimes, particularly if you're shooting at the 300 to 500 millimeter range. Well, as you approach a flock slowly, when you see the first couple of birds take that step back, that tells you, okay, that's as close as you're going to go. Now, you could always get down on your belly and crawl and get closer, but for bird and flight photography, that's going to be very challenging. So watch bird behavior, watch animal behavior, watch insect behavior, and develop that database of how they're going to react in specific situations. Knowing that certain butterflies are going to be more mobile in the morning when it's cool. They're going to sit on a flower longer than when it's warmer and they're feeding and they're just constantly moving from one spot to another. So that's tip number 2. Get to know your subject so that you can anticipate rather than react. And tip number 3 is going to be master your system. I have a saying I like to use a lot, which is master your system, master your photography. Now, I'm an OM System ambassador, and I've created an OM System mentorship program. Right now, I'm taking 12 participants through it, 9-month-long mentorship program. to help them master their system. And when I talk about mastering your camera system, I'm talking about the controls, the menu, the dials, the buttons, all the various elements of your camera body and lenses, rings, focus rings, switches, all the different special features, drive modes, autofocus settings. All too often, I see a lot of what I call Facebook guru photographers. And I'm going to pick on us men for a minute. It's generally men aged 20 to 45. And by golly, on Facebook, they're a guru. They are an expert. But you go look at their images online and they generally suck, But by golly, they're experts on chromatic aberration or diffraction. Oh my gosh, they'll talk about megapixels and ISO invariance. And they love to talk about all those things. But you go look at their images and there's really not a lot to show for it, right? And they've always got to have the newest gear. They've got, 1,743 bazillion pixels. Oh my gosh. Yeah, they have poor field craft and they need that many pixels because they're going to crop the crap out of their image. And they don't work on mastering their system. They don't work on mastering their photography. So whatever system you have, and obviously as an OM system ambassador, I'd love for you to come to the OM system side. But the reality is whatever camera you have, master it. Master how to control it. Your camera should become an extension of your body and of your mind. I see so many people having to stop and take a minute. If they're going to change a setting, they have to think about what button, they have to think about what menu item, they have to look at the back of their camera for a while. Well, you want to master that system such that you can do everything you need while you're looking through the viewfinder and paying attention to your subject, right? So the more you master your system, it becomes second nature. I don't even think about what dial I'm using to adjust shutter speed. I've done it so much that my mind just does that. I know that for my mind, moving my dial right makes me think of a faster shutter speed. So I program my shutter speed to be on the front dial. I swap it from the default in OM system, and I'll explain that in another video why. But my shutter speed's on the front, and going right is faster. That's how my mind works. Your mind might think more going left is faster. Cool. You don't have to be like me on that. Program your dial to go left to make your shutter speed faster. But by doing that, we're helping our camera and our mind become one. And the more you do this, okay, the more your camera becomes second nature, because the less you have to think about the technical side. And the technical side of photography is very important. I love the technical side, but I also love the creative side of nature photography. So the more I master the technical side of photography, the less I have to think about it. And then I get to focus more on the creative side of wildlife photography. And you're going to see a tremendous improvement in your images when you can nail the technical side repeatedly, but free up your mind to focus on the creative side of it. And I think you'll learn to see that, for example, with bird tracking, with AI subject detection in my OM1 camera body. I don't have to worry a lot because I understand all my autofocus settings and what works well when and how, and I can make adjustments needed. I really don't have to worry about autofocus much anymore. And what that does is with a bird in flight, or say a perched bird, I can even more think about how I want to compose my image in camera. I rarely crop an image. Maybe less than 3% of my images ever have any crop to them, okay? And that's because I like to compose them in image as they are. And for me, I find that's just what I find more challenging, more fulfilling in my photography. That does not mean that if you crop 70% of your images that you're wrong. I'm just telling you how I do it. I'm not saying you should do it that way. But what I would encourage you to do is to master your system, regardless of what system you shoot with. Now, one of the reasons I joke that I have a job as a photography workshop instructor is because I love to read owner's manuals. I've read every owner's manual on every camera body I have at least 3 times through, including the footnotes, because those are some of the most important elements you can find, are those limitations on features in your camera that may hinder or help you in specific situations, okay? And, when we show different kinds of images, knowing how your system works will help you capture better images. Nobody ever looks at your images and goes, oh, wow, you must shoot with this camera body. Right? I hear people arguing all the time. Well, and I believe there are certain reasons why certain camera systems are better. They all have strengths. They all have weaknesses. But in the long run, nobody ever looks at your image and goes, oh, that was shot with blank. Okay? But the more you master that system, the more people are going to look at your images and see visual and compelling images. So I hope those 3 tips today are going to help you see a big jump, a big gain in the results of your wildlife photography. I'd like to thank Wildside Nature Tours, who I'm a senior photography instructor for, that allows me to have the time to produce these videos for you. If you have any questions, comments, please post them down below. I'd love to respond to them, love to answer any questions, and hopefully maybe sometime you can join me out in the field. I know Christmas is approaching. I hope y'all have a wonderful festive holiday season, and hopefully you'll get some really cool photography gifts. Thank you.